I'm having a bit of a test run here. I'm not sure whether this recording is going to turn out very well. But to begin with, I need to reference, not that. Let's have a look. Here we go. We'll start here. These are the Jewish months. Now, when I present this little bit of information, bear in mind there is some variation as to when the start of the year is, or the head of the year. Some calendars sort of go by the March sort of start, others by September, and that's all based on things that you can find on Repomans 64's channel, where the head of the year was changed by 6 months. But for the purpose of this video, that's not really significant, because what I'm looking at here, and I'll do my best to refer to notes as well, so you might hear a bit of paper like that. So what I'm trying to do here is just look at some time frames based on where we are now. Now, as a disclaimer, I'm starting the search based on the 30th of November, which is being a day that Repomans identified, and I think even Wayne over at Worship and Watch, no, he's not at Worship and Watch, Wayne at We Are the Overcomers, I think he may have touched on this. I haven't watched Koolcats or Repomans' latest videos. I've had a fair bit on this weekend. It's Sunday night here in Tasmania, 10:08 PM on the 26th of November. I forgot to mention that. Now, our story begins in the book of Ezra. Now, if you go back to my previous video, you can have a look at some of the Bible verses that I'd used there, and I'd suggest that you do go back and watch that. But starting in Ezra 9 and verse 4, I'll paraphrase all this based on the assumption that you did watch the previous video. What we see is some trembling at the words of God, and then we have a gathering around of the exiles, and then we have some sitting down and being appalled until evening sacrifice, and then at evening sacrifice we have some standing up and some proclamations or prayers to the Lord, and that takes us through to basically Ezra 9 and verse 10. Then we come over to Ezra. This is where our timeline begins. Come over to Ezra 10, and there's another large crowd of Israelites, men, women and children, gathered around again, weeping bitterly. And as I mentioned in my previous video, those that sat down appalled, I guess that implies that there were a group that didn't, and a crowd's gathered here weeping bitterly. I guess that implies that there are some that didn't, because a crowd doesn't imply all. There was a proclamation made: we've been unfaithful to our God by marrying foreign women. And then it goes on. Ezra rose up, putting the priests and the Levites and all the Israelites under an oath. And then we come down to, and that appears to me to have taken perhaps a day, because from verse 9 in chapter 9 verse 4, we've got the sitting down of Ezra, and there was sitting there feeling appalled, and then there was the standing up, and then some prayers were said and some oaths were made, and then it looks like probably, because we're talking evening sacrifice, that's when Ezra rose, so it's looking like, it says at the beginning of verse 10, while Ezra was praying and confessing, weeping and throwing himself before the house of God, a large crowd of Israelite men, women and children gathered around him. Now, as he'd already sat down during the day, in verse 4, in chapter 9, verse 4, then he arose at evening sacrifice, or rose at evening sacrifice, in chapter 9, verse 5. I assume that this chapter 10, verse 1 crowd is possibly the next day. Anyway, I'm not too sure that time period's totally significant for what I'm about to say. But after we move down to verse 7, chapter 10, verse 7, we see a proclamation was issued throughout Judah and Jerusalem for all the exiles to assemble in Jerusalem. Anyone who failed to appear within 3 days would forfeit his property in accordance with the decision of the officials and the elders, and would himself be expelled from the assembly of the exiles. Okay, so we were given a 3-day proclamation, and then it says, within 3 days all the men of Judah and Benjamin had gathered in Jerusalem, and on the 20th day of the 9th month, all people were sitting in the square before the house of God, greatly distressed by the occasion and because of the rain. So there was a mention there of rain, which kind of links to as in the days of Noah, the rain and the flood, and I mentioned that in my previous video as well. But then we have in Ezra chapter 10, starting at verse 16. So the exiles did as was proposed. Ezra the priest selected men who were family heads, one from each family division, and all of them designated by name. Then we have some dates again. On the first day of the 10th month they sat down to investigate the cases, and by the first day of the first month they were finished dealing with all the men who had married foreign women. So, I won't read any more verses. Just toss my Bible aside there. And I'll go to my notes. So, first of all, we have a 3-day proclamation. Have a look at my pointer here, which started on Kislev, the 20th. Now, for the sake of this video, let's just assume it was a 29-day month then. And it's interesting because if it was a 29-day month, it may not have been, but I'm just making that assumption here. None of this is hard and fast, massively supported by other verses, etc. I'm just trying to extrapolate some time periods from Ezra that might apply to now. So we've got, let's say, a 9-day period. We'll go by 29, from the 20th to the 29th. Because it says on the 20th is when they sat down to begin the investigation, and it was concluded on the first day of the 10th month. So it started on the 20th of Kislev, and it was concluded by the 1st of Tevet. So the investigation started on the 20th, and if it was a 29-day month, then there was 9 days of investigation. That is interesting because that is 3 periods of 3. 3 times 3. We also had, prior to the investigation, a 3-day proclamation or warning to gather on the 9th month, 20th day. So we started with a 3-day proclamation, They gathered on the 20th. It was concluded by the 1st of Kislev, 1st of Tevet, which was possibly 9 days later. Started on the 20th, I might have messed up there, started on the 20th of Kislev, concluded possibly 9 days later on the 1st of Tevet. So there was your second group of 3 by 3, second group of threes being a 9-day period. And then it goes on to say that the investigations lasted until the first day of the first month. So they went from the 1st of Tevet, there, Shevat, Adar, and they finished on the 1st of Nissan. 3 months again, another 3-day period. Now, all of that is very interesting. There seems to be a lot of 3-day periods in there. There was one reference to rain, which could be as in the days of Noah. We're interestingly looking at a period between the beginning of, let me see here, that was how many days, they're not in order of months. If you're looking at the screen now, let's get rid of that, and let's have a look at something else. It's very slow to respond. Okay, so Chanukah this year, Chanukah starts on the 7th of December as we've identified, and I think goes through to the 14th or 15th of December. That's Chanukah. So we have this date from Repomans, which is the 30th of November. Let's have a look on the Jewish calendar. So the 30th of November, which is the 17th of Kislev, which would have been around about when the 3-day proclamation was given, because around about 3 days later, on the 20th, is when they gathered together in the square to hear the judgment, and the judgment was that on the 1st of the 10th month, we would have the beginning of an investigation which would go right through to the 1st of the first month, which is 3 months later. So we have Repomans 30th of November being the 7th of Kislev. We have 17th of Kislev, 3 days later, on the 20th of November. Where are we? Must be there. Sorry, what are we looking at? I'm going mad here. 30th of November is the 17th of Kislev. Oops. And so it's November, so we come over December 18, 19, 20 of Kislev is the 3rd of December, and we have on the 7th of December the beginning of Chanukah, going through to the 15th by the look of it. So we've got a Repomans Day on the 13th, on the 30th of November, which is the 17th. In Ezra, we had a 3-day warning. Then on the 20th of Kislev, which is December the 3rd, we've got the proclamation, which goes through to December the 13th, which is the first of the Tevet, and it lasts for 3 months. Interesting, December the 13th is, well, it's not really a significant day, but it is 7 days into Rosh Chodesh. But we have Repomans' date of the 30th, sort of lining up with the 3-day proclamation. The 20th is when the actual meeting occurred for the decision to be made as to when the investigation was started, the 20th. Now, if we're looking at those 3-day periods, we've got a 3-day period from Repomans' 30th of November, or the 17th. 3-day period brings us to the 20th, which is when they all gathered. And then, interestingly enough, we have Koolcats' next date of the 7th being the start of Chanukah. But 3 days from that, 1, 2, 3, I'm kind of looking at something pretty significant beginning perhaps either 3 days after Repomans' 30th of November, which is the 7th of Kislev, or if we don't see something significant happen then, that 3-day warning could be leading up to here, and then we could have something significant happen 3 days later, perhaps on the 6th, or maybe the 7th, if we're looking at 3.5 days, 84 hours, the period of time that Jesus was in the grave. Because 3 days, it's a loose term, really. You know, if you start at midday on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you go to midday on Thursday, that's 3 24-hour periods. But if I say Thursday night at 9 o'clock, it's still technically 3 days, but we've gone more than a 3 lots of 24-hour periods. So what I'm saying is, I think something significant may well happen on the 30th, which is Repomans' sort of confusing count forward, count backward day. It may happen on the 3rd of December, which was the end of the 3-day proclamation, and when Ezra had to gather for a decision to be made about their naughty activities that they'd been engaging in. Or we could be looking at 3 or maybe 3.5 days after that, which would be how long Jesus was in the tomb for, 84 hours, which would also bring us to the beginning of Chanukah. So we're in very, very interesting times, but for me, personally, if I was to pick any of those right now, I'm kind of leaning towards, it's hard to say. I'm kind of leaning towards Repomans' 30th date being the beginning of a 3.5 day countdown to something significant. So if we go back, Repomans' 30th here being the countdown to something very significant, because that was when the 3-day warning was given out that they needed to gather, according to Ezra. So I think Repomans 30th is a 3 or a 3.5 day countdown, leading us to when the actual investigation started here, or between those two, because we've got, you know, sunset in Israel versus midnight for days, etc. Or if we don't see something significant here, this could be the beginning. The 20th of Kislev could be the beginning of a 3 or a 3.5 day countdown, bringing us sort of over to this area here. But if I think at the latest we're going to see something happen probably on the 7th of December at the latest, simply given by just solely based on those 3-day, 3-month sort of time frames that were given, and the fact that between the 20th and the sort of decision as what was going to happen was given out to the end of that month and the beginning of the 10th month, the first Tevet, was potentially 9 days or another 3 lots of 3-day periods. So I'm thinking 3 days is significant. Whether that 3 days begins here on the 17th, as per Repoman, which was around about when the order to gather in 3 days' time was given, whether it begins here on the 20th when they actually did gather to have a decision made, and 3 lots of 3 days later, brings us to sort of here, which is when the beginning of the investigation started, and it went for a full 3 months through to the first month of the first day of Nissan. So keep watching, either on Repomans 30th, for the reasons that I've given, 3 to 3.5 days after that, or potentially 3 to 3.5 days after that, bringing us to the 7th of December, which is the beginning of Chanukah. Remember, Chanukah's about, it's an interesting one too. I think I did have a little screenshot about that. Yeah, the Festival of Lights, commemorating the miracle of the oil. So could that be referring to the foolish virgins and the wise virgins, the oil in the lamp, which kind of, according to, I think, maybe Repoman and Wayne over at We Are the Overcomers, I think that oil refers to tribulation saints. So does that mean the beginning of Chanukah, we are raptured, and the rest of this refers to things that are going to occur during the tribulation or to the tribulation saints? I'm not sure. Anyway, these are just thoughts. So I'm definitely watching the 30th, 3 to 3.5 days after that, and 3 to 3.5 days after that, and I'm specifically watching the 30th, as I mentioned, based on the fact that that is approximately when the proclamation went out in Ezra that they were to gather on the 20th day of the 9th month, at which time they heard the ruling, which was to start an investigation on the first day of the 10th month, which was to last right through to the first day of the first month. So hopefully you understood that. I didn't mess it up too bad. Remember, our salvation comes through Jesus only. I sin every day. I don't wake up without sinning. I go to bed sinning. They're sins of thought, sins of omission, sins of things that I do. There is no way that I can work my way into heaven. Not even if if God said, right, I'll give you 5 seconds to go sinless, and then you can come to heaven, I'd still not make it. We are born into sin. There was only one person that didn't sin, that was Jesus. We need to confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord. He is God. We need to believe in our heart that he willingly sacrificed himself, a sinless person. He was crucified on a cross. He was in the grave for 3 days, 3.5 days, 84 hours. He rose from the dead. He defeated death, sin, and the grave. The only way to the Father is through the Son and the works that he did. Our works are but filthy rags before the Lord. We cannot add anything to our salvation. If we try to add anything that we've done to the works of Jesus, we actually bring those works down a notch, because we have no good works before our Father. So, bear that in mind. It's only through Jesus. Give it all over to him. It's not the sins that you commit. It's not the good things you do, the bad things you do, the good things you don't do, the bad things you don't do. It's all only by the blood of Jesus that we're saved. And on a finishing note, pray for Israel. There's a lot of strife going on over there. Doesn't matter what people say. Don't worry about politics. Don't worry about leaders of countries, etc., etc. God said to pray for Israel and its people. End of story. We don't argue about it. That's a prerequisite. God bless everybody. Hope this video works. Take care. Hope to see you all very soon.